The PlayStation 1 has a lot of groundbreaking titles that would go on to define the gaming industry. Metal Gear Solid, Symphony of the Night, Tekken 3, almost all of Squaresoft's work. However, Armored Core was not one of them. It was instead a sleeper hit, slowly amassing a cult following that enjoyed its customization with obtuse yet engaging game design. From Software is more well known these days for games like Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring, and for good reason. They're excellent all around and deserve all the acclaim and accolades they got. However, Armored Core was their staple series for a decade and a half for a reason, putting out 15 games in that time span. The series got 5 numbered entries that, with each, had at least one expansion game, sometimes way more than that, usually split into their own generations. Not all of these games are perfect, but each generation at least brings some new game mechanics to the table. The series started off with its first generation, those being Armored Core 1, Project Phantasma, and Master of Arena. This video is going to cover all 3 games and discuss what each game adds on to the previous experience, as well as my general thoughts, because there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about. These games are neat. Now before we start, warning, I like Armored Core. I grew up with the PS2 and PS3 era of games and have a decent amount of experience with them, so keep that bias in mind as I talk about these games. I decided to emulate these games on PC, mainly for the sake of recording. I don't physically own the PlayStation 1 trilogy, and looking at the prices on the secondhand market, it's pretty dire. You can buy the first Armored Core, in the States at least, via the PSN store as a PS1 download on the PS3 or the Vita. It's a decent option if you want to play it legit. The picture quality is kind of rough on PS3. However, on the Vita the game looks pretty sharp. And you can also button assign to make the controls work on 2 analog sticks. My hands tend to cramp when I play like this though, so your mileage may vary. You can also transfer memory card data between systems, so that's cool. But here's the thing, those systems are retro by this point. While the Vita is in this middle ground currently, whether or not it's retro, the PS3 was released in 2006. Like for real, who has a PS3 plugged in or a Vita charged? While I do enjoy these systems for specific reasons, I wouldn't recommend acquiring those systems just to play Armored Core 1. Other than crazy people like me, your only real option for the PS1 games is emulation via a PC, especially if you want to play more than the first one. DuckStation works as the best option for PlayStation 1 emulation in 2023, and it's what I used. I rolled with essentially the stock PlayStation 1 settings, other than geometry correction and perspective correct textures, which makes the polygons not warbled due to the power of more math. And that's cool. There is also the option of what's called a Mr. FPGA, which has really accurate hardware emulation, which is different than software emulation, which is what most PC emulators use, which always has some level of inaccuracy. It also has cool native features, like native widescreen and CPU overclocking to get better in-game performance. However, that option's only recommended if you're really into retro games, because it's an expensive investment. Unless these games are re-released in the future, I would honestly recommend just emulating them. Hey, if these games are re-released, just buy them that way. Anyway, let's get that out of the way and talk about the game. It's so humbling to see the beginning of the 3D era of video games, to see how far games have come. Nothing exemplifies that more than the intro FMV to Armored Core. It actually does a decent job in showing off what the game is all about, choosing and changing your AC, the mechs are called Armored Cores, and taking it out on missions, but looking at it now, it's objectively rough. Here's the thing, it's just so cute to see early 3D animation being played off as serious and cool. Plus, you can kind of sell its stiffness due to the only things being on the screen being mechs and robots. It's fun, it's old, and it sells the game decently enough. Anyways, pressing New Game makes you put in your pilot's name, and then it takes you to the screen that is a quick briefing on the Raven's test. This is the only test that we give to people who want to become a Raven. You must battle against the opponent AC and survive. If you survive, you will be considered a Raven. That's all. Good luck. You immediately spawn in and start getting shot at by your opponents. They throw you into the wolves for this fight. There is no screen that shows you the controls. You can't go into an options menu and see options for control layouts or anything like that. It's survive or die. Let's tackle the controls since we're here. This is an early 3D game, so the controls are not the standard twin-stick configuration that games have nowadays. The game has tank controls on the D-pad, so up and down are move forward and backward, and left and right on the D-pad are look left and right respectively. So that means L1 and R1 are strafe left and right. and L2 and R2 are look up and down. This was before the DualShock controller was out, so the scheme makes sense for its time. This doesn't mean the control scheme is aged well for people who aren't used to it. The game doesn't demand a total precision in terms of positioning and location, so that mitigates a lot of the damage I find. Anyway, the rest of the actions are on the face buttons, your 2 attack buttons, your switch weapons button, and your boost/jump button. The boost button functions as a grounded boost when you're holding a direction. If you're standing still, it works as a jump if you tap the button, but flight if you hold it. If you're boosting in one particular direction on the ground, if you let go and tap/hold the button again, you begin flight in that direction. There's a lot of depth that feels natural once you're used to it in this one button. It's great. It's also tied to your energy gauge, so usage is naturally limited. Circle strafing was usually the solution to victory in early 3D games, and it does work for a bit in this game. However, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution against enemy ACs and other groups of enemies. Instead, double tapping the boost button while moving allows you to move fast and regen your energy at the same time. It's essentially bunny hopping, and while it's not necessary, it's a pretty useful skill to learn. There's a bit of a learning curve in this game's gameplay. Managing ammo, your energy, trying to dodge enemy fire, all of these at once can be a little daunting. Luckily, this first fight is just against 2 smaller guys, and it's quick to restart if you fail, so it's not that big of a deal. The game does get much tougher later, but the difficulty curve is good enough for the players to learn the ropes. You beat the test, and you get a call over the radio.
The test is over. From this moment on, you are a Raven.
You load into the Raven's Nest, which is where you'll be spending a lot of time in the game, from customizing your AC, to accepting missions, reading the mail, buying parts, etc. It's a pretty plain screen, but it does convey all the info you need in a clean fashion, so I wouldn't say it's a positive or a negative. Now we get to one of the most important and defining menus of the entire series, the garage. Here you can customize your AC in a multitude of ways. There's the assembly menu, which is where you can change out all of your parts, from your 4 body parts, that being your head, arms, legs, and core, your 4 weapon slots, 2 back units, a right arm weapon, and a left arm weapon, your generator for your energy, your FCS or firing control system, and your boosters. Now all of these might seem a bit self-explanatory and have multiple assets associated with them, but the FCS is a little unique. The large box that you might have seen on screen during gameplay has a part associated with it. Any enemy that is in this box, your AC will lock onto and you could shoot at the enemy as your target. The size, shape, and reactiveness of the lock-on is mostly dependent on your FCS. It also affects the amount of missile lock-ons and the effective lock-on range. This lockbox is effective at getting rid of precision that a lot of early 3D games suffered from, making it easier for the player to focus on movement and resource management. Back to the options in the garage, there is the optional parts menu, where depending on your core, you can equip a certain amount of enhancements parts at no penalty. There's the performance menu, which gives you a rough overview of your AC, although the screen doesn't ultimately matter too much. The change color menu allows you to change the color scheme of your body parts. You can change each part individually or all parts at once. Each part has 3 sections that can be assigned different colors via the 3 sliders of RGB, so you can get really creative with your AC's look. For this early in 3D games, it's really cool and impressive, not to mention a boon to make your AC feel like it's your own. There's also patterns, but I didn't really use these and I've never been a big fan. There's the edit emblem option, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's a paint feature to draw whatever emblem you want. You have your own color palette, you've got a fill tool, a scroll tool, line, box, and circle tools. It's a decent amount of features. It gets put on your AC's shoulder and shows up in the ranking menu when you reach the upper echelon of Ravens later in the game. The AC name entry is also pretty self-explanatory. You enter a name for your AC. Then finally, one of the most important options, the AC test. This is an invaluable tool. You can take your AC on a test drive without spending cash on ammo or repair expenses. This is a great resource for trying out new builds and parts without the danger of going into a mission unprepared. Definitely use this at every opportunity. Building an AC that is functional and is good enough to be successful is a skill curve in of itself. Using all of your tools at your disposal to make something that you're comfortable piloting and won't cost too much to maintain, knowing what parts to prioritize and upgrading, recognizing what part of your AC is causing failure and needs change, a balance in weapons and what each one is useful for, it might seem aimless if you're lost. Learning this curve and what you prioritize or care about to keep on top of is a part of the difficulty of Armored Core. There is a second part to all of this, and that has to do with the shop. As you complete missions, you'll start to get some money. Now with said cash, the shop allows you to buy a staggering amount of parts for your AC. While it might seem like there's a lot of the store that is inaccessible because of its price, you can just sell your old part to get a decently upgraded part to help you get a new one. The parts you own in this game never degrade in value, so if you buy a part that is expensive and you don't like it, you can just sell it to get all of your money back. This is a key part of the formula. The game wants and expects you to experiment with your AC. This is why the AC test option in the garage is so important. You can test out parts that you have the budget for with no cost. Do you want an energy rifle instead of the original rifle you start with? Just sell the old rifle. Find out that your generator can't keep up with that new energy rifle you just bought? Sell the energy rifle, buy the old weapon again, and upgrade the generator so you can get the energy rifle later once you complete some more missions. Without this customization, Armored Core would be a neat but forgettable third-person action game. With these elements, it elevates what would be standard into something that feels like your own, like you're responsible for all your victories and losses, like it's your journey. The customization can appeal to people who treat customization as a thing to solve, or people who want to fashion their AC. It's very cool. The heights that this game reaches is only because of the combination of all of its elements, creating this loop of great gameplay. From Software has been always great at personalizing your journey, even all the way back in 1997. It's part of their identity. There are other parts to this menu, like the ranking menu. Here you can see the top current Ravens, all of them tough and dangerous. You will slowly rise through the ranks as you beat more and more missions, and you can reach the top. Notably, there are 2 top Ravens, Hustler 1 and his AC 9-ball, and Lostweiss and her AC Valkyrie. There are others, but most of them don't matter too much. You can encounter some of them on missions, and if you eliminate them while on a mission, they disappear from the ranking. Armored Core uses its mechanics with each other to make actions and events matter more than they otherwise would. It's great. Now the missions that Armored Core starts you off with, it's eliminate squatters and eliminate strikers. Video games were better when they weren't political, like Armored Core. You're a Raven, a mercenary. Your survival as a Raven relies on benefiting the higher powers to subjugate the working class who are dissatisfied with the status quo. Those higher powers mentioned being Murakumo and Chrome, the 2 dominating corporations that rule. From your choices of missions and the emails you get during the course of the game, you can glean what kind of world Armored Core is, a dystopic, cruel world of violence. This is further exemplified in the briefings. For example, this line of dialogue. No time to deal with such trifling matters, but they don't seem to understand. Anyway, it says a lot with the text, true to From Software fashion. Now the game does deliver more direct storytelling via its mail system, where people will email you messages when you progress far enough in the story or when you complete certain missions. Sometimes you'll get the context of a mystery that happens during a mission, and other times you'll get more info on the state of the world. Sometimes you won't get anything, but it's usually with missions that are pretty self-explanatory. You have a regular contact with the Raven's Nest, that being R. They'll tell you more information on the general things about the world. I'll be in touch. These help a lot in grounding actions that happen throughout the course of the game. It carries a lot of the narrative for this title. Missions in this game always start with a briefing and each offer a different payout in cash or an AC part. The more dangerous missions will reward you with more money, so you can gauge difficulty via this method. These briefings are important to listen to. They give you the objective, things to look out for, and some context as to why you're going to be doing the things you're offered. Skipping these briefings will lead to defeat. Some of these missions are extremely dangerous and need to be dealt with precision. Take this one for example. Your objective is to destroy all of the drones that have gone out of control but are not outwardly a threat. However, everything else in the room is explosive and extremely dangerous, so that's where the challenge of this particular mission comes from. For example,
Defenses damaged. Cannot continue combat.
one mistake like that can put you into a lot of debt, so you have to play smart and listen to all the info you can get. Even buying specific parts that will help you achieve victory in specific missions is a good idea, because you can just sell them back later at full price. Or you can save scum, which is completely valid. If you fail the mission, the game continues, so if you don't save scum, you're stuck with your debt. It isn't easy to consistently win missions if you aren't used to the game, so sometimes choosing easier missions that are giving you less money is the right choice because they will be achievable. The start of the game does not have a ton of difficulty, so your mileage may vary. The beginning of the game tends to have a lot of the good music, and while it isn't consistent, a lot of the important missions tend to have pretty good tracks playing. It's pretty weird, like a lot of the PS1 library is, but most of it rocks. Other tracks are just bizarre, but they're still pretty good. The best track in the game is put in the best spot, the main menu, with shape memory alloys. Just slow and chill enough to not wear you out with the high energy, but it's still a great listen to keep things going. It never gets old, which is a great quality you want to have when you're going to be spending a long time in this menu. However, even if a lot of the music isn't great, some of the missions feel oddly empty without music. Some missions do benefit from a lack of music for the sake of creepy atmosphere, and that part's good. It's a little disappointing when these missions are just silent, but it's not enough of an impact on the game's overall soundscape to be a complete negative. Sometimes there's also some chatter via some voice acting, but it's not too common until the later half of the game.
How dare you come here? Don't get carried away just because you're a raven.
The voice acting isn't bad, but it doesn't rise to anything that is great. Most of it is just generally giving you information.
Is that you, Raven? The target is in this sector. We're counting on you.
While talking about the presentation, let's talk about the visuals. Now, as already stated, this is a PlayStation 1 game. The upper bounds of what the system could do would only be realized by the PS1's most accomplished developers in its twilight years. So keep in mind that this was an earlier game in its gen, in mid-97. I mean, look at Final Fantasy IX. So with that in mind, most of the game just looks pretty standard. Some stages of the game, mainly the interiors, looks just okay. Some missions do stand out to their use of area lighting, like this transparent hallway, it's freaking sick. But when the game goes to open outside arenas, some of the skyboxes are pretty great looking due to their usage of color. It doesn't look like this game had a high budget, but that's completely fine. The frame rate is also, for the most part, decent for its time, and it's certainly playable, although very much like games from before the 2000s, sometimes the frame rate tanks. If you haven't seen PS1 games in a while, it might be a bit rough going back to this. Now what is great is the player AC and their level of customization on it. It looks good, and considering that's what's on screen for most of the game's runtime, it was a smart choice to focus on. The animation suite of the game is pretty limited, but all looks semi-natural to ACs and the smaller robots. A good thing is that the animation doesn't get in the way of the game feeling good, so it does its job. The user interface is informative, but it doesn't get in the way. The lockbox, your targeting reticle, is informative and effective at conveying the information you need. For weapons that don't use a lockbox, there is this arc that is projected that is also great at conveying its intent. So overall, the visuals are pretty decent, just fine in some ways, but good in the way it needs to be. Back to the game, while it does have an overall story, it doesn't start off with a bang. Initially, it's mostly focused on yourself eking out a living as a raven. The story eventually forms as corporations recognize your skill and trust you to take on more important missions later in the game. However, while that forms, Armored Core has side stories that usually last around 3 missions. They usually involve some kind of escalation of specific circumstances, and you dealing with them while learning an aspect of the world. These are essential to the flow of the game. It allows some immediate story to happen while keeping things rolling. There is one about worker striking, as you saw earlier, there's some missions about developing AI, and then there's some about Human Plus, which is a hidden game mechanic integrated into the game's story. So if you are struggling in the game and keep losing a lot of missions, you'll go into debt and you won't be able to afford anything. When you reach negative 50,000 credits, you'll see this.
Is this the subject for our next experiment?
Yes. His papers say he was a raven.
Ah, so he took the usual route here.
Seems to have piled up quite a debt.
Must have dashed his dreams. But he will be reborn in this experiment.
That is, if he lives.
You have a point there. Let's get started.
Your mission progress will be reset to the beginning of the game, and your name changes. As an aside, there is a cheat code to change your pilot's name, but it isn't supposed to be accessible, it's supposed to be permanent. This, obviously, can be initially devastating. Losing a lot of progress like this with no warning isn't great. However, you can gain permanent abilities that will help you do better. There's enhanced radar specs, increased generator efficiency, a blade beam, the ability to use back weapons without kneeling. There are very game-breaking abilities here. Sometimes you will gain an ability per reset, but other times you won't get anything. You do keep all of the AC parts you had before the reset, so you can retain some value in parts rather than money. If you stick with it, you will be able to beat this game. The game wants you to play through it all, regardless of your skill level. It may take a long time, but it is possible. If you're having trouble and going into debt, keep going. There are also story implications for Human Plus, but I won't go into that for now. When the difficulty starts to climb, it's not just because of tough enemies. There are plenty of those kinds of challenges, but there are missions that are tough because of their setup. Trying to destroy an enemy that is fast and approaching a target on their own, trying to clear out an undersea labyrinth, and other interesting encounters. There's also one that is a clear from software staple in here. To my knowledge, it never shows up again in the franchise, and it's There are some goofs, and most of the missions are fun, but as the game gets closer to the end, things start to go out of control. So from here on out, it's spoiler territory, so watch out for that. We're going into the story. Skip to this part if you care about spoilers. So depending on what missions you take, either Murakumo or Chrome take over as the single super corporation that rule. The missions you get are different, the mail you get is different, and you get one of two FMVs on whether Murakumo or Chrome fall, and all of that is neat. However, none of this would have happened if it weren't for the player character. The power that you achieve, and you being successful in your actions is the cause of either one of them failing. Because of this, you catch the ire of some higher power, and after the fall, they try to have you killed. You upset the achieved balance that the world had, and they will do everything they can to have you gone. By this point, when you fail a mission, whatever helped you get out of those failed missions isn't helping you anymore. You die. By the time you hit these missions, there are like 2 missions left, so there isn't a lot to worry about, like if you were to get stuck in an unwinnable situation, so that's not an issue. I think this new fail state heightens the tensions and importance of these few final missions. The stakes are raised and you have to find out what's going on. Who on earth would want you killed by this point? Well, you find out in the final mission, in which the briefing is another trap. They send you to a mission whose pretenses are completely false. They want you to deactivate mines at the Raven's Nest HQ. If the player didn't notice, the last mission where you get jumped was from the Raven's Nest. They never usually take sides, so the Raven's Nest in the previous mission asking you to wrap up killing the remnants of whichever corp was destroyed was fishy. They then ambush you and try to have you killed. Anyway, this final mission is an onslaught. It's split between 2 instances, and after the first half, your AP and ammo get refilled, which is nice. It's funny, you go in expecting the briefing to be completely false, but there were actually mines there. They were just put there for you. The next big room is the most infamous room in the game, and for good reason. It's the only area in the game, in my opinion, that demands a lot of skill in the platforming department. You have to ascend this very tall room via these moving blocks, with enemies and turrets on the blocks themselves. This room is easily the worst part of the game. It really sucks. The blocks move so fast with your slow movement that it's hard to land properly. It's so easy to fall all the way to the bottom, where you have to start over. Once you get past this, you hear a digital voice.
Resistance is futile. Your fate is sealed.
Your onboard computer warns you.
Enemy ranking AC identified as 9-ball.
The number 1 Raven is loyal to the Raven's Nest to the end and tries to stop you. This fight is extremely tough. He uses a lot of advantages that you can only gain from Human Plus. While this does have narrative implications, what this mainly means is that for now, this fight is extremely tough. It doesn't help that this arena is annoying to fight in. You don't have to fight him, however. You can just go past him and he won't give chase too hard. Once you get past him, you get some more dialogue.
Go back. It is not too late.
Get this, another 9-ball appears. 9-ball is this thing's tool. It uses him to achieve its ends. Considering how tough just one of them is, it's no wonder Hustler 1 can achieve whatever it sets its mind out to do, at least until you come along. You can either destroy the second 9-ball or you run past him, and you come to this huge supercomputer.
Are you satisfied? Do you want to destroy order? Destroy the world? Is that what you want? We were needed. That's why we were born. People cannot live without order, even if it is a lie. Go on living, Raven. You or I? Which one of us was ultimately right? You have the right, the duty to find that out.
The ending of the game puts everything into perspective. Throughout the game, you run into technology that is first presumed to be from either Chrome or Murakumo, because they seem to be using it for their own gain, such as Human Plus. However, you come to discover that most of the tech they use is older than the corporations themselves. All of these can be tied to the AI at the end of Armored Core. This world is one where an AI has been trapping humanity in a cycle of war and order, but controlled war and order. The Great Destruction was a war which brought humanity to near extinction and forced humanity underground. Afterwards, an AI was put in charge of humanity so they would never reach their destructive apex. Its solution? A cycle of corporate dystopia. At least it was better than total destruction, right? Until we came along, both sides were pretty even, but we helped and aided in the destruction of one, granting the other absolute control. While the AI can handle this, our instability and uncertainty made us a huge risk, and we were deemed a threat because we couldn't be controlled. In our bid for survival, we break free from the AI's grasp and destroy it, freeing humanity from its shackles and letting them decide for themselves what their own destiny should be. This AI as a villain is great. From their perspective, they're only doing the right thing. Preventing the possibility of humanity causing another extinction event by keeping them under their own control makes sense. However, the constant strife and violence that happens underneath this rule is not worth the what-ifs, and while the AI doesn't see it this way, in the final cutscene the AI acknowledges this as a potential way forward once it realizes it can't control humanity anymore. It's pretty great stuff. There are other details here that are worth looking at. Human Plus being tech that is won from the Raven's Nest, experimenting on pilots who they bankrupt. It then uses those higher level Human Plus abilities on their own tools, that being ACs like 9-ball. It makes sense that whenever you reset and get experimented on, you don't always get a new ability because they aren't directly trying to make you yourself better. They're testing out new experiments and whatnot. Sometimes those end up not benefiting you. There's also the fact that they change your name into something else and you can't change it. They own you. Not to mention, every time this happens, it is implied that you're in a new cycle that this AI is perpetuating. There are also other ACs that you run into during the playthrough that are heavily implied were experimented on, and you're paid to silence them. There is one mission that has a former Raven that you kill on the pretense that they've gone insane and are mentally unstable, and in their dying breath, they warn you that you could be next.
Watch
The Raven's Nest does not want this info being discovered at all. Because you need that money to get better parts and to survive other tougher missions, you follow orders. This game came out in 1997. Games that weren't RPGs generally were not doing this level of detail in their stories. This story is so on brand for From Software. It's funny how the Souls series is credited for these ideas and themes when it's always been a part of their DNA. Not to say that Dark Souls is unoriginal, it has its own ideas on how to approach its story, but the studio has always had ideas on how to approach mechanics and story that only got heightened in their latest releases. This was their 4th game, and was their 2nd IP after Kingsfield. You have to put some thought and dig a bit to put the story together, but it's fascinating regardless. There is one last thing I want to talk about, and that's the secrets. Secret parts and weapons are abundant and able to be picked up throughout the game during missions. You can use these in combat or just sell them for some extra cash. There are 2 specific ones that are very rad, and they are the Moonlight Energy Blade and the Kurosawa Energy Rifle. I missed both of these in my initial playthrough. But they are some of the most powerful weapons in the game. The Kurosawa especially. Look at this damage! The Moonlight Blade has a whole hidden area in the mission for it, so discovering it in of itself is pretty neat. Both of these are heavy, so you have to build around them, but they are incredibly powerful and fun to use. And don't worry about missing out on these secrets. Every single mission is available at the end, so don't worry about missing content. Armored Core is one of those games that is more than the sum of its parts. Individually, a lot of its elements are just average to good, with the exception of the expansive customization. But they all work together to create this cohesive experience. It creates a game that, while it doesn't have a ton of work in terms of assets outside of missions, it manages to feel like so much more. It is very much a From Software story, and has a lot to dig into while saying its own things about its world with subtext. While it didn't make a big impact on the overall gaming landscape, to From Software, this game defined the output of the company for nearly 12 years. It is a solid foundation for the rest of the series while standing on its own as a worthwhile experience. While this game wouldn't be my first recommendation into the Armored Core series, it's a great option if it intrigues you. If you can handle the early 3D controls and some experimental storytelling, then I would recommend this game. Now, it's time for Project Phantasma. This game was released not as a full-fledged sequel, but more like an old-school standalone expansion. You can carry over your save data from the original game to this one to continue to make money and to play with your old ACs, and that deserves a lot of credit. Especially when so much carries over, it feels great and like a natural extension gameplay-wise. Now when you boot up the game, there's a different localizer this time around, that being ASCII Entertainment. It does suck to see Sony not localize anymore, because there are a lot more typos in this game and other things, but we'll get to that later. The opening FMV is, Wow, look at all these cool robots in a void. I'm sorry, this looks something like Aero Gauge on the N64. Play it! It's not a great first impression. You either load up your Armored Core 1 save, or you start a new game, and you're thrown into the same menu as the first game. It's very samey, which is disappointing, but there is a major addition, and that's the arena. The addition of this is the most defining thing about Project Phantasma. Rather than having a ranking of the current Ravens, you can fight up a ladder of increasingly more difficult AC opponents. Not only is this a great content and value add, it's just fun. You don't lose any money on ammunition or repairs, and it's also a great way to make a ton of money. It's great for testing out some new builds to find out what you like, testing your metal in an optional arena that you can attack at your own pace is a great break from constant missions. There's custom descriptions, emblems, and designs for every opponent. Some of these opponents are just confusing, but also pretty funny. Look at this guy, for example, the Gear Crusher, with his AC, the Anti-Tank. He belongs to the group known as the Anti-Tank Committee. They have reached their goal. Bro, he's a tank! He's got treads! There are a few goofy arena pilots, and this keeps the seriousness of the game in check. This goofiness is generally great. In this aspect, the localization keeps this intact. There are also multiple choices for arena locations to fight in, and you get to choose your background to gain an advantage. Overall, the arena is a great add and will become a mainstay for almost all Armored Core games going forward. There are a couple of what I assume translation issues in some of these arena descriptions. Take rank 41, AC Pisces. The description states that he has good mobility and a sniper rifle. If you look at his AC portrait though, you can tell he has a machine gun. This is misleading and straight up bad advice. They also lessen the immersion for some players by stating you in your description as he. This is pretty minor and a nitpick. For dudes it doesn't matter, but otherwise, it stands out and is immersion breaking. The first game was not consistent in the way Project Phantasma is. Now it does describe your character as he in the Human Plus cutscene, but that's easily missable. Though in AC1, it only does this once and is not insistent about it. For the descriptions of you in the ranking list, it states you as a Raven, which is just what all mercenaries are called. You could essentially self-insert whoever you are or want to be into this role. Here in Project Phantasma, it's more consistently descriptive as the player being a man, and it's not for a narrative reason. It's small, but to the people who it impacts, it's a noticeable difference. I didn't mention this ambiguity is a good thing in Armored Core 1, because it should be the standard. If you're gonna have a self-insert character, you should make the player ambiguous by default. Why be restrictive for no gain? It doesn't feel like the game's framing of the player as a dude was a conscious decision, rather it feels like it was an assumption to write like this. Going forward, Armored Core games would usually refer to the protagonist of every game as a dude, and I personally think it's a missed opportunity for easy inclusion. There is one game that I think has a reason to refer directly to the player, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, rant aside and back to the arena, it's a great addition and matters a lot in Project Phantasma, because the length of the game aside from that is pretty short. You can beat this game in under 5 hours easily. The sortie count in Project Phantasma is 17 missions, which is a substantial downgrade from the 47 missions in AC1. On the plus side, there is one ever-present story that is told from beginning to end that is easier to understand, so that part is a boon. The story is a lot more fast-paced in this game as well, so it always feels like there is something happening. The story is a prequel to Armored Core, so the events of that game haven't happened yet. The story starts a few missions in when you rescue someone named Sumika. By this point, you've done a few missions that are pretty standard, although you've had to run-in with a hothead called Stinger. When Sumika gets rescued, she tells you what's up, that they are about to experiment on her, they being the Doomsday Organization. They're working on Project Phantasma, which is an advanced weapons system. They want to combine computer tech with the human brain with quote-unquote no end goal. This cutscene is pretty cool. It sets up the rest of the game's narrative and gives some payoff to a cool mission. In other games, this text would usually be male, but this is more. The rest of the game is dealing with the Doomsday Organization and discovering what Project Phantasma is while constantly dealing with Stinger. Now there are some cool missions to this game. For example, there is one where you have to stealth around a forest and move in conjunction with an ally. Then there's a defense mission where you have to protect 3 roads that are split up by some hills concurrently. So while there aren't as many missions, it is generally more varied than Armored Core 1. Some environments in these missions are a little strange. There is one mission that takes place in an old castle, for example. It's weird. It's kind of cool to change up the levels with some different environments. It does keep things fresh. Your mileage may vary on whether or not this takes you out of the game or prefer the change up in level aesthetic. Other than that, there are unique loading screens for every mission having a codename for each sortie, what time of day it's happening at, and its location. This helps the flow of accepting the briefing into playing the mission. It's a great addition. Other than that, there isn't a ton new with the presentation. There's also no new music at all in this game, and the score is just from Armored Core 1. They do use it more often than Armored Core 1, which is a bit better in that aspect, but there are no new tracks. The menus and the UI are all also the same. I wouldn't say the in-game visuals are marginally better. Granted, if all you want is an extension or a side story to Armored Core, most of these things won't bother you. It does hurt its own identity when it has all of these elements that are the same as the first game. Considering the fact that nowadays you're probably emulating the game out of cost or convenience, it's not as impactful as I might imagine someone buying the game at full price back when the game was released. Looking at when these games came out in Japan, they both came out in 1997, only 5 months apart. It's shocking how fast this game came out after Armored Core 1, and it makes sense that almost everything presentation-wise is the same. Now there are a few things worth talking about the game's story. If you want to play the game, then feel free to skip to this part, although I wouldn't say it's super important this time around like it is for Armored Core 1. Sumika is a pretty cool character. She essentially dismantles and destroys the Doomsday Organization out of revenge for them kidnapping her. She's the constant driver of the story. She gives you all your missions that you do. This is her game. Her giving you advice and chatter throughout missions became the template for the Navigator archetype that each game would have for the rest of the series. She isn't a deep character, but she does the job and she's all that she needs to be for the game to work. There is also Stinger, who's the primary antagonist of the game. He would be threatening, but he comes across as tryhard and edgy. He's kind of a joke. You straight up beat him multiple times and each time he runs away. He does start to lose it by the end, which is a little interesting, but it's just silly by that point. The final boss is pretty cool, and it takes place in the Abyss, a place From Software loves to put in its games. Having the final boss in the Abyss is pretty raw. It's also implied that Project Phantasma needs to interface with someone on a mental level, and the experimenting on human brains was to make this weapon functional. Considering that Project Phantasma is essentially a weapon of mass destruction, it adds a splash of flavor onto the events of Armored Core 1. They do add some more parts to this game, like this back part that gives you extra ammo for your other guns, which opens up build variety and is pretty cool. I used 2 of them at the same time for the Kurosawa to double its ammo count, for example. There's also one more super weapon introduced to the game, that being the Finger. It might be the most broken weapon the series has ever had. It has 3,000 rounds, shoots 5 rounds per shot, shoots every other frame, does a ton of damage, and it's extremely light. It's a literal fire hose of bullets, and it cleans out every enemy in the game within seconds. It's absolutely ridiculous. Amazing. This is the final reward for beating the arena, so it's a great incentive for completion of this side mode. Discussing the game overall, there isn't a lot to talk about, unfortunately. It's more of the same, and whether or not that's a good thing or not is dependent on if you like Armored Core 1. While I personally don't like it as much as the original, it's still pretty fun with the new parts and the arena is thrown in there. The story is more present and there is more consistent characters, so that is an improvement in general, but it's pretty simple. Unfortunately, its extremely short dev time shows in its lack of presentation enhancements, with no new music being a particularly big sting for me. I wouldn't recommend it as a standalone game, but it does work a lot better as an extension to Armored Core 1. A lot of its content tends to be a bit tougher than the first game, so it feels good to bring in a finished save. While I'm not the biggest fan, it's decent if you want more. Now, Master of Arena, on the other hand, this game goes places. In terms of length, it's about the same as Project Phantasma, but it does so much more with its content and structure that it sets itself apart from the rest of the series. It's a unique entry that completely shocked me upon my playthrough. But you know what happens when you boot up a PS1 game. This intro is legitimately fantastic. The way the visuals sync up with the music is great. The song itself is just incredible. The way it builds to the climax is also great. The CG honestly looks leagues better than the previous two intros on both a fidelity level and shockingly an animation level. This step up from the original intro from Armored Core is substantial, not to mention the fact that the events of it describe the play experience. You build and customize your AC, then you go on to fight other ACs in an arena. The CG intro honestly still holds up, even considering its age. Now, intro aside, this game was localized by Agetech, and while it may seem like it's its third localization team, this team is mostly the same from Project Phantasma if the credits are to be believed. Agetech sprang off from ASCII Entertainment's American subsidiary to become their own publishing studio. They mainly published FromSoft's games from the PS1 and the PS2 in the United States, along with some SNK's work, like Garrow for the Dreamcast. Anyway, you can continue to take your save file from either Project Phantasma or the original Armored Core and play with your earned credits and ACs from those games. That part continues to be neat. If you load a save file, you just get thrown into the menu. Right when you get into the game, there's immediately a visual menu overhaul. It looks like you're selecting items from a computer menu with this icon motif they're going for. Even if it's functionally pretty similar, it feels fresh. Now, continuing with the presentation, graphics-wise, Master of Arena is still the same level of polish that the original game was, but there's some more variation in locales which spices things up. Granted, this game did come out in early '99, other series were evolving at a rapid pace, but Armored Core didn't really do that. I personally think it's fine, however. Games don't always have to be pushing new technology in order to be quality experiences. If the lack of evolution does bother you though, I get that. The loading screens are also cleaned up in this game, showing a cleaner look that would become pretty standard from here on. Now, unlike Project Phantasma, there's a whole new soundtrack in this game. It does keep some of the old tracks for the arena fights, but there is a lot of new music. The new music has its own style, and that's pretty great. There are some standout tracks that are absolutely stellar, like the main theme that you hear in the intro and is a leitmotif throughout the game. Having a new soundtrack and energy in the music really helps define this game from the rest of the PS1 era. It's genuinely good stuff. Now, one quick thing that you might not notice is that there's a rebalance of a lot of the parts. Most notably, the finger got nerfed into the ground. They cut its ammo from 3,000 to 500. That alone cuts its roll into a burst-style gun that is to be used sparingly. While this makes the gun less fun and busted, it's better for the balance and the challenge of the game. Most of the other part changes are for the best. The roulette of weapons are much better once all of the options are on an even level playing field. Now, the first mission starts off as a standard intro job, taking out a hacker. By the end of the mission, someone else comes in and finishes the job for you, and it's Nineball from the first game. He immediately establishes a presence and is a threat, and the mail you get after the mission helps establish a lot of things.
I don't care who you are. No one can defeat me.
You are not a self-insert in this game, you are someone with a backstory. You became a Raven to exact revenge on Nineball. Nineball was a part of a particularly bloody engagement between two corporations that resulted in a lot of civilian casualties. You were one of the survivors of that incident, becoming a Raven to exact your own revenge. This is in the intro if you choose a fresh new game instead of loading a file, by the way. This story is so much different than other Armored Core games, where usually the player character is just some person, some self-insert. Not here though, you have an explicit and established backstory. Your Raven's Nest contact, Lana, warns you that Nineball is a top-ranked Raven for a reason, and that usually people who face him die a meaningless death. She does say that she can eventually arrange the two of you to meet, but first you need to get into the arena for yourself, and you need to get a corporate sponsor to do so. This setup is particularly smart. It contextualizes the main character wanting to do the missions to get buddy-buddy with the corporations. It allows the player to get invested into the arena because the story and the game mechanics both interact with each other to have flow. This combines both narrative and gameplay to create an experience that is all the better for it, the kind of experience that can be only in a video game. The story flows from here. After you do a few missions, ProdTech contacts you as a corporate sponsor to enter the subarena. The subarena does not have a ranking, so you can fight anyone in the arena you want. From there, you alternate between doing missions in arena to progress the story. There are around the same amount of missions as Project Phantasma, but they continue to have more varied missions than the last game, by having all of them have at least a visual gimmick. The missions in turn feel more memorable and also like they matter more because they interact with the subarena itself. Usually the goal of these missions is that you're there to eliminate someone who is in said subarena. While I could continue describing the game, the flow continues to change and it remains interesting. I think discovering it on your own is worthwhile. The ebbs and flows of the story and how it changes when you progress is really neat. Now there is one thing I want to bring up, and that's the fact that eventually you do get to a new arena. It's ranked in order of difficulty with Nineball at the top. Even the guy at the bottom of this arena uses the Kurosawa. All of these guys are extremely tough. There are some tough fights, like this duo, the brothers. One is a pilot while the other is a mechanic. Their emblem is of two bunny ladies. Brothers, right? Anyway, these fights are tough. The difficulty curve in this game kind of just continues from the end of Armored Core 1. Missions continue to get tougher, while the AC fights in the arena start to consistently use Human Plus and super weapons. It's difficult. I view this as a good thing. The game becoming more challenging makes it feel like a continuation of the Armored Core games on PS1, but in a good way. It makes it feel like it's the next chapter gameplay-wise, asking you to deal with bigger and bigger threats. While this does limit the appeal of this game in particular for people who haven't played Armored Core games before, a lot of the game's strengths come from its differences from the formula that other Armored Core games have, so its appeal is mainly for fans. I think that's okay. Having those challenging elements makes it better for people who want more from the series. Most of the games in the series are pretty approachable from a difficulty standpoint. I think it's fine to have expansions that heighten the difficulty of the games they come from. Not every game has to be an entry point. but that does mean its appeal is limited. Now, if you did miss some secret parts in Armored Core 1 or Project Phantasma, you can't just buy them from the store for a high price. So this game is possible on a new game file. You don't need to carry over a save file if you want to avoid Armored Core 1 or Project Phantasma. It is tough, but it is doable if you have previous experience with the series, or you're comfortable with tank controls from the era. While it might be initially disappointing that there's not a traditional arena like Project Phantasma or future games, this game came with the mysterious second disc that contains a lot of side content, mainly a ton of mini arenas. Some arenas are essentially weight classes, but instead of size, it's leg type, so a bipedal arena, quad leg arena, tread arena, and so on and so forth. These require the player to fit in with the leg class, so it makes these arenas interesting to interact with. Others are more interesting and unlockable, like an arena that is made up of Japanese players' ACs that competed in a Project Phantasma tournament. There's a From Software arena, a Master arena with the hardest challenges in the game, and a lot more. There are a total of 109 extra ACs to fight on this disc, not to mention the 49 fights in the first disc. That's a total of 158 ACs to fight in this game. All of them have their own build, their emblem, description, everything. While the amount of missions in the game may not be a lot, this game more than makes up for it with a staggering amount of arena fights. There's more, however. There is also an arena maker, where you can create your own arena with your own ACs to create your own challenges or to challenge your friends. You can save these arenas on a memory card, and that's such a neat feature. It might not have much value when the series has progressed so much past this game, but as a send-off of Armored Core on the PS1, it gives the player tools to keep playing the game for a long time. Not to mention, because this game came with 2 discs, you can system link with 1 copy of the game. If you have 2 PlayStations, a PlayStation Link cable, and 2 TVs, you can play System Link versus multiplayer. Now you could do this with earlier games, but you needed 2 copies of either game to play System Link. But because Master of Arena has 2 discs, you only need 1 copy of the game, and that's awesome. Now past this point, it's spoiler zone. The game's story intertwines with the mechanics enough to be interesting for a playthrough. So skip here if you care, but if you don't care that much, it's fine. Just keep in mind that this will spoil most of Armored Core 1 as well. After progressing a bit, ProgTech will force you to do missions that defends their interests and themselves, and it will restrict your arena access by revoking your license. Lana, your Raven's Nest contact, hates this because you're doing things out of her control, and will eventually revoke her support as an advisor along with Raven's Nest support. She openly threatens you. Good luck, you'll die soon enough. With you saving ProgTech multiple times, and with them being under total threat of destruction via these constant attacks, they throw their whole weight behind you to help decipher who Nineball is. Nineball goes after your own informant at ProgTech and uses him as bait in an attempt to kill you. You succeed in saving him and killing Nineball, but Hustler 1 remains in the arena. You achieve the number 2 spot in the arena, right below Nineball. You get mail from Lana, taunting you, but ultimately giving you what you want. Your skills have far exceeded my original estimation of you. You have become too powerful. Do you remember? I told you I'd arrange a meeting with Nineball for you one day. Well, that day has arrived. Rather than fighting you in the arena, they'd rather fight you on their own terms, in their own domain. So they lock you out of the arena. It's such an interesting idea for an Armored Core game, once again using the systems to tell and enhance its own story, enhancing the gameplay as well in turn. You're locked out of the arena for the rest of the game. You have no choice but to meet their demands. The final mission is very similar to Armored Core 1, going into their trap and facing a ton of forces. Lana turns out to be the same entity that is Hustler 1, which is an AI that is the same as the Raven's Nest from the first game. You see multiple Nineball ACs on standby, and have to destroy at least 2 of them. You then descend deeper and face its final form, Nineball Seraph, and it's cool looking and pretty high fidelity for the PlayStation 1. Now this fight is very tough. It's fast, it hits hard, and it's dangerous. Now when I said Master of Arena difficulty-wise is like if the difficulty curve had continued past Armored Core 1 and kept inclining, I meant it. It takes me multiple tries to defeat 9-Ball, and I eventually get it by outplaying it and managing my resources. This has a lot of implications and clarifications for the first game and helps solidify most of the ideas from Armored Core 1. It's cool stuff. Now one thing to keep in mind is the fact that the only way this game makes sense timeline-wise is if it takes place concurrently to Armored Core 1. It doesn't state it specifically. Both endings would cancel out the other game. So if both protagonists are attacking Raven's Nest at the same time, it makes the line of dialogue, "Why are all of you here?" make sense, because it didn't expect for both of you to attack at once. It's a loose connection and a little headcanon-y, but it does work. Now here's the thing, on its own beat for beat, the story isn't super interesting. There are some twists and turns, but on paper it's just fine. Every element of the narrative is boosted past where it should be by tying its story beats with restricting your options and tying into progression. Because your ability to take on the arena and missions are given to you by someone else granting you access, when they take that away due to your actions, even if it is scripted, you feel it a lot more. These characters feel like they are interacting with you personally, making this a much different feel than the rest of the series. Not to say that all Armored Core games should be personal stories, there is a lot of value and variety for the series. Having a game like this helps so much for giving it some spice among its peers. Even if it's a story that is simple, it's so much better than it should be because of the kind of story that can be only told in video games. The game on those grounds alone is valuable, but it's also just a great game on its own. Master of Arena is a great improvement over Project Phantasma, enhancing mission variety and having a more engaging story by intertwining game mechanics with the context of its story. It's a great send-off to the series on the PS1, giving the player a lot of content in those extra arenas on the second disc, making for a substantial release. Its difficulty helps give this game this spice that really appeals to me personally. If you're a fan of the PS2 Armored Core games or Armored Core 1, this game is highly recommended. It's easily one of the best Armored Core games in the series. It does almost everything right. Overall, the PS1 trilogy certainly has its highs and lows, but like a lot of the greats from that gen, they're experimental and still great. It asks you to read in between the lines, to interpret its stories, and to get really invested in your ACs. Considering what FromSoft was putting out at the time, it's a huge step up from Kingsfield's polish-wise, and Armored Core's influence can still be felt even in its modern work. Large entities clinging to cycles in a desperate attempt to cling to what they think would keep current society going, no matter the cost. But when that cost becomes too great, someone steps up to break that cycle, to give humanity or something greater a shot at working. Even if it doesn't work out, people should be given that shot to have something better, to be something better. This reads like Dark Souls, but a lot of these elements have been synonymous with not just From's later work, but all of their work, including Armored Core. Not to mention, once you understand the flow of Armored Core and can grapple the controls, the games are just fun. Learning how and what to improve and upgrade, doing so and seeing obvious results is always a treat. It makes the experience feel so personal, like it's truly your AC. Trying out particular flavors of guns and weight classes in a run is always a good time playing an Armored Core game, and that's certainly the case for the originals. The music is great, the encounters are fun, and all of its elements work together to build each other up. There are a few trip-ups like some localization woes, but that doesn't stop these games from being great. While I wouldn't recommend specifically the first AC generation as someone's first Armored Core games, they're still a pretty good option if you can handle PS1 jank and rust. They still definitely hold up as a great and cohesive experience, and are easily recommended if you want to try out something new and fresh. It's shocking how much of the groundwork for the series was laid in these first installments. Even if they are a little rusty, they absolutely have value to this day.